This is Naked by the Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. Brought to you by Vladi and Nektarios Lolios. And remember to subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help us share it with the world. How are you doing today, Nektarios?
I'm well. I'm actually very well. I started this daily yoga session every day at 7:30 for a full hour.
I mean, I have a full admiration for this, that you do this. Yeah.
I'm clearly not the most athletic of people. So and I'm trying to practice the thing that I'm also learning with the journaling, which is you show up no matter how you feel.
I wanted to actually ask you about that even today, because with Michael, we talk about journaling. And I was wondering as I was preparing, like, are you still doing it? Are you still showing up?
Okay, we're going straight into how I am. We're talking about myself. I haven't even asked you how you are. Okay, but we'll come to that. So, to your answer, ish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so not every day.
That's still good.
The interesting thing is that I realized that what I'm experiencing in yoga covers some of the journaling stuff. So an element of introspection, an element of calm. Yeah. But all this to say that now I have a daily 90 minutes allocated in my calendar for self-care.
Well done. Well done.
But it's hard because 7:30 in the morning, that used to be my quiet time, that I would either do some work or reflect, but I always enjoyed getting up early, pottering around, and then slowly easing into the day. And the way it works now is at 7:30, I'm on the mat.
You wake up even earlier now to get that?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. Okay. And then I'm exercise is still not something that comes naturally. So, but I'm feeling, you ask how I'm feeling. I'm feeling energized. Your
energy.
That's how great. Are you, Vladi?
I am also much better. I'm much better. I was actually thinking about it today. So, I mean, you guys some of you remember. So last week was difficult, right? The beginning of the week. And I was reflecting on it. I even wrote this post, which I want to talk about a little bit later, because it's also related to Michael and sort of how we are open about going through those struggles and what being vulnerable about it and write about it or find different way to share it with people. Like, how does that make us feel? So for me, it helped to get the support from you guys as teams, but also from the wider. So some of the folks that reach out, I don't even know. So that was certainly helpful. The Friday off was really helpful. So I was with my nieces, which was fun. Exhausting in a different way, but that's a different story for a different podcast, maybe. But I'm doing much better. I mean, I think the last one was also that I have created very consciously few allocated focused work slots in my calendar, and my teams respected it, which was really good. So yeah, I have my Friday off this week still. So I'm thinking, how am I going to use it, which is tomorrow. Also, Poopy, you guys will know that's my creature. That's my little dog. Or our dog with Matei. And she has been struggling over the past few days. And she really is also one of my sort of a support system. Like, people say that like a dog can really make a difference for your emotional health. In that way, she really does. And so she was not well. And I was down. Like, it's interesting how I show up on the calls, and now the people who know me, I mean, Nektarios, sometimes it's you, but also like Naeem, my other co-founder in Pakistan, like he was literally like at the beginning of the call, he's like, hey, you looking not good, which is not nice to always hear, but like people pick up now on the energies and everything. So it was actually, it was correct. I was more down, and she's good now. She is sleeping here by my side. So that's all good. And we had a peaceful morning, good walk. I was listening to Michael's episode to prepare for this reflection. So I am doing well.
Good. Yeah. That's nice to hear.
We established that.
So when we did our last reflections episode, Extra Naked for Kelly Holmes, it was literally on the back of Kelly saying that she's stepping back, right? We have a very different vibe today with the episode of Michael Lints. It's been quite a deep conversation. And we would like to share some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking to start with that they're in some way they're connected, or they've connected for me in my world. So yesterday I had a conversation with one of our founders in Pakistan, and he started the conversation with saying, "Hey Vladi, I saw that post you guys did with Kelly Holmes, the athlete, and I listened to it." And he's like, she talks about burnout, and he's like, how does one identify that they are in the burnout? So he was sort of reflecting on his own experience to not being able to identify the signals. And today, when I was listening to Michael again, I was like, that's exactly it, because he was very articulate, or quite articulate about that. And I was thinking about my own world and was curious about how do you have it, Nektarios? Like, are you more able today, after several experiences, to better identify what your signals are when you are hitting the dip, whether it's burnout or whatever else you call it?
So Michael talks about how he never got injured in sport and suddenly had injuries, right?
Yeah.
I used to come back from my regular trips, and people would make a joke that every time I'm back from a trip, they can forget booking meetings with me for the next couple of days because I usually get sick. Right? And I dismissed it. I just dismissed it, said, whatever. I may be occasionally. And there was one particular colleague who said, no, every time, especially if it's a longer trip, like going to Europe somewhere, it's fine. But when you go to Asia or US or whatever, when you come back, you're usually 2 to 3 days, you're not available. No, you're not well. So one of the things that I definitely do now, 3 years later, 4 years later, is listen to these signals much more clearly, right? So my body was injured, but I wasn't acknowledging it as that at all. Sleep's another one. I definitely noticed that when things get tough, my sleep is the first thing to go. And it's not lying in bed or not being able to fall asleep. For me, it's always the same pattern. When it's periods of intense stress, that, especially when it's more consistent, more sustained, then I sleep for...
like your head is going, or?
No, I fall asleep. I wake up at 2 or 3, and then I'm awake for 2 or 3 hours. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, we talk a lot about self-reflection. I've learned to much better scan my body to look for these signals. But also, I'm also kinder to myself, which I wasn't when I was in it. The burnout was literally just full steam ahead all the time. And ignoring these things also meant just not acknowledging you need to look after yourself, even though intellectually I would have had that conversation with you and I would say to you, of course I look after myself. I go for a walk or I listen to music, and but I wasn't really looking after myself.
It wasn't real. Yeah. So guys, maybe it's a moment for you also in your own space to maybe have a moment of reflection of what are some of those signals for you, right? That are indicating for you that you are actually somewhere on the path to exhaustion, or just being mentally, emotionally tired. And for me, similarly, I mean, it has a physical but also emotional sort of signal. So I become really agitated, like very easily agitated, and particularly with people who are close to me, they will now know. So I have a very short sort of patience, and the temper is really out there. I become emotional much easier. So even when I look on the last Sunday, right, like the burst of tears and the need to put it out there. And I think the last one I could think of when I was reflecting was just inability to really focus, like the feeling of being overwhelmed by everything and completely losing your compass, which in some way paralyzes you. So you sort of become numb in a way of not being able to really move to anything. I mean, it was interesting, and I think quite brave also from Michael to share also about the fact that it led him in some way to drinking earlier in a day, as he was saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the need to numb the feeling that he was missing on something. So I guess there are different ways how this really manifests itself. But Asif, the founder, I had the conversation for listening to this. Do your own reflection, or anybody out there who's listening.
I think so. Maybe we should also acknowledge, because it's the extra naked episodes are also there to be a bit more topical, a bit more in the moment of what's happening around us, right? And it was a bit of a reality check talking to Michael about COVID and about how COVID affected his world in Singapore. And we talked about COVID on and off since we've existed, because we launched in the middle of it, right? But if you look at what's happening in the world right now, so you've got some countries where there's a glimmer of hope because there's vaccines and people getting vaccinated and the rates are dropping. And then you look what's happening in India, which is a complete opposite, where people thought they got away with things last year because there was a very tight lockdown at the beginning. And suddenly there's I think, what was it today? A triple mutating virus. The hospitals are completely overwhelmed. The health system is not get up for it. And people die preventable deaths. And I wonder how the people in India are listening or experiencing at the moment. Oh my God, I think we were on the track to slowly come out of it, no matter how this feels. But now it's going back to, not even back to zero, it's going even further back, because this has never been the case before. So it's and for me, when we were working on the episode with Michael, it took me back to, you're in this busy hamster wheel, crazy life, 100 miles an hour, and suddenly overnight everything stops. Like everything stops. And then you go, okay, what's happening to myself? But also everybody around you has the same experience. So it's this collective kick in the teeth.
Yeah, it's definitely feels like a roller coaster, where in some way your hopes get high, and then again you find yourself in the same place, right? It was very useful for me to sort of hear Michael speaking about rewiring his system, and when we went into more detail, he broke it into the small habits, right? Because sometimes it can feel sort of vague. I mean, it's theoretical in some ways. Like, yeah, I change, the way I am, or, like the sort of how I live my days. But it was very useful when he sort of started sharing his experience. Oh my God, Catherine, please cut this out.
No, it's fine.
No? Okay, we don't have to cut it out. You see what happens sometimes? This is like unexpected roller coaster. But what I was saying is that it was awesome to hear Michael sharing his experience about the small habit changes. I was thinking about the book Atomic Habits, but where it was like I started listening to music. I realized that I didn't like walking before. And actually walking started becoming my friend, right? So sometimes it's about small things really that can make a big difference. I think the power of journaling that we unpacked there, was certainly something that landed with me. And I was thinking about the book that we talked about from Jerry, and I think we mentioned it a few times, and I'm looking at it back here in my library, where there are a few journaling nudges. And for instance, that works for me. Like, I sort of did not yet, or have not yet found my way to journaling, like doing regularly. I do it more when I'm in a difficult space. So then I need to sort of put the emotions on the paper. And the book helped me, as well, as Michael was saying, because there are some useful questions in there that are the good nudges. And I was thinking about your own journaling experience, Nektarios, where you were sharing that the nudges and the triggers and the questions help as well. So small things often.
So I didn't fully answer your question earlier, right? So I probably dial in 3 times a week out of the 5 that it happens, because I feel more confident that I actually have a tool now when I need it. I think I needed the daily showing up to get into the practice and into the rhythm and just being, because a lot of it is sometimes just as a barrier because you just don't know what it means. And that keeps you from doing it or trying it. At least in my case, I have this kind of fear of the unknown, for some reason, all sorts of assumptions. And then it becomes a bit of a muscle that you train and suddenly, okay, I know how to use this muscle now. I know how to switch it on when I need it. And I know when I can relax it when I don't need it. So I'm comfortable with it. This is now nearly 2 months in, more than 2 months in, to say there's days where I can miss it. And there's been a couple of moments where I actually went onto the site and did my own piece, but not at the allocated time where to do this with a group. So, which was also new for me. But there is still sometimes this comfort on this particular model with Sanctus, where you just start up and you see some familiar faces and you've never spoken to these people, but they're there and they were there before and you kind of know they're going to be there tomorrow as well.
It's a belonging.
Yeah, that
right?
that is
Build
helpful.
a new community.
But on the point that Michael made, I think this episode, more than any other episode so far, highlighted for me very clearly the importance of scanning yourself, checking yourself, awareness, signals, right? And baby steps.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, something big happens in your life and somehow something equally big happens, but in a very different part of your life, which is the Black Lives Matter movement. And if you don't have the capacity to check in and manage yourself a little bit, you also can't free yourself up to deal with the other stuff. There was an odd link between the two, because I was wondering afterwards, would Michael have been able to dedicate his attention, his time and his passion to the movie if it hadn't been for COVID? Because he would have been on a plane.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So there was also something about this openness for new things that you create by being better at managing yourself.
Yeah, I've heard this several times when people now have been reflecting on the past year, that actually the pause had brought some, opened some new opportunities and things that they sort of had on a shelf and thought never will come back to. But I want to come back to what you said about the baby steps. It resonates so much because in some way, I do remember, even when we were recording, when I was expecting Michael to share sort of his magic, like, okay, so now we establish there was this crisis scenario, and then so what have you done, right? And you, in some way, part of you expects this a big thing, and then he said, like, started listening to music, walks, small things, and it is true. It is the small tweaks that you do and the habits you start to build.
There is one thing that we don't talk much about, and Michael was probably the first one to explicitly say it, which was stillness. Because he talks about just sitting there and doing nothing, right? And because I grew up around a lot of music, I very early on learned to appreciate the things between the bits, because some of the music, it's all about that. It's not, it's the gaps. And I love this generally, but we don't talk much about it at all. And what I'm discovering now with his yoga practice, which is not exercise yoga. It's a combination of breathing, which was important to me, meditation and the movements. But today we did this piece where it's all about doing something that's high intensity and then focusing on the nothingness after that, right? That stillness moment that gives you also energy, right? And I thought it was wonderful that Michael mentioned that. So when it comes to baby steps, maybe it's also just taking half an hour and doing absolutely nothing, which is what people do with the mindfulness apps and with Calm. It's just clearing your head.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that I can relate to that. Still, though, I have to share this because it's passing my mind, is that question around when Michael and us, we were also relating to that when he was sharing, the whole experience around having the adrenaline burst from and feeling worthy and creating value when he was traveling and being on stages and conferences and planes and that movement, the dynamic. I know that we are not going back to the world. There is no coming back to, right? At least that's how I'm looking on this whole evolution that is happening in society. We're moving towards something adjusted, something new. But still, I have that question around, like, I hope that, whether it's for Michael or for us or anybody else out there, that we are sort of rewiring the way how we are being, and also how more kind we are to ourselves and treating our emotional, mental well-being, is that there is not going to be that going back to the, original space or system, and possibly might come. So this is a little bit of, what's also still running through my mind is that I guess it's an ongoing journey. I would assume you probably might end up in that place again. But maybe, as you said, now you have that muscle, so you can switch it on, reflect better. What's your thought? Because you were sharing a lot, right? I mean, I have it even written in here. When you were saying, like, when you are in it, nobody can drag you out of it. Only you need something as fundamental as COVID. And when I heard that, I was like, is that really so? Like, I hope that's not true, because if you find yourself in it next time, I don't want for any COVID or, wider systemic social catastrophe to take you out of that.
So I think, first of all, I think the world will go back to what it was before. I think humans are generally naturally lazy.
I don't have that view.
No, I know that you don't have that view. I'm telling you that I don't share your view. And I'm quite cynical about this, because there's a whole economy built around these behaviors, and I don't think people are naturally inclined to change that. It doesn't mean that as an individual we have no control over it, and some of us will choose different paths. Some of us will have more freedom to not having to rush around, because that was partly, if you're part of the system and there's just a very tight set of rules, I think these rules have relaxed a little bit. So people might not be expected to show up in person across the country, etc. But I don't think that necessarily things will change drastically. But that said, small anecdote, not anecdote, but people know that I used to love traveling, and I used to love the comfortable travel. And I got this message yesterday from this guy who posted on a frequent flyer forum that he misses travel so much that he thinks of buying a really cheap ticket just to get to the airport and sit in the lounge and drink the booze and then go again without traveling. And people were saying to me, "Is this you?" I was like, "No, this is actually not me." So I'm past that. But about 5 years ago, I would have probably related to that a lot more, because I was so used to this. Was much more home. I spent more time at Heathrow Airport than I spent in the office.
So you're not afraid that it might come back, like that feeling of relating your self-worth and value and who you are to that experience?
No, I don't worry about that, because that's exactly what's happened. So there's been a lot of time about where I think it's just more this constant loop of making sure that I'm feeling okay with what I'm doing, and I know that this wasn't healthy. So, this has taken us down a strange path.
I think a realistic path, though. You're right. I mean, pragmatic. I think it's not all like glitter and shiny and always on a positive note. I think, though, it's still on a positive note, or if we're ending here, it is on a positive note, because I think it's just coming back to the small tweaks. And I think, can I find myself again crying on Sunday night and being overwhelmed? I think so. But at least now I have my toolkit. And I know that as you said, that there are a few things that I can plug in, and I've already experienced that they can be helpful to me. So that's sort of where I am ending with this for myself.
I would like to make one point about control.
Okay.
Because in one of the things that I kind of took away from the episode with Michael is also just looking at the things you can control yourself, accepting that the things that are out of your control, and then using what you can influence, using your time and effort and power to do stuff that you can influence. So the thing about the movie is important to me in this context. So there were things that happened that were out of Michael's control, out of everybody's control. COVID, right? It shakes you. It causes you to think about your identity, your purpose, and all the stuff we talked about, which is important. And this was an external trigger, right? But then when you sit there and you kind of start your baby steps, you start looking after yourself little by little, you also get this awareness about what is possible. So you see opportunities in a different way. And I think that connection between the two, we didn't make it on the episode as strongly, but on reflection, this was an important one for me. I have a feeling, and of course I can't know, that the movie probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Michael having had that moment of reflection and the time to allocate to this. So it's also important to see the positives that come out of something like this by looking after yourself and realizing that there's things you actually have within your control, even in the most difficult situations. And something amazing can come out of this, like a movie that addresses a subject with a very specific perspective that hasn't been brought to people's attention before.
Yeah.
So that's how I would like to end this.
But you trigger one more thought from me, which we do this. But I was just, maybe to applaud once again to Michael to be courageous to put his thoughts and experiences out there on the paper and share it with the world. And, maybe, folks, for you out there, for those who feel that this is something that feels authentic and you're thinking about it and you feel that you might be there, go for it. It helps many others to relate. You will, I know, Nektarios, you said that, you open yourself up there for some attack, but I think it comes with like being in the ring. Take it from the people who are in the ring with you. The reactions might be of all kind, but indeed, I think from my personal experience, but what we've seen now over the past year with Naked and the people who share their struggles and ways to cope, it does move a needle for a lot of people out there that they can find a community, belonging, and a hope that there is a way around it and we are not alone in this. So speak up.
Well, thank you very much, Vladi.
Have a good day, everybody.
And you. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Naked by The Future Farm, where entrepreneurship is stripped to its vulnerable core. To learn more about our work, sign up to our newsletter or visit thefuturefarm.co, where you can also apply to be a Naked guest. Naked is produced by Dan Turgel and edited by Catherine Dworkin. And remember, subscribe, follow, and rate Naked to help share it with the world.